Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the center of the massive hall, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. The Galactic Council chamber was built to impress, with curved walls that stretched up into darkness and seats that floated in perfect circles around the central platform. 12 different alien species sat in those floating seats, all looking down at her with various expressions of boredom, curiosity, or barely hidden disgust. The hall itself was a work of art. Made from materials that didn't exist on Earth, it seemed to glow with its own inner light. The air tasted different here, cleaned and processed by technology. Humanity was still decades away from understanding. Everything about this place was designed to remind visitors that they were in the presence of beings far more advanced than themselves. Chen had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. She knew the name of every council member, their species, history, their likes and dislikes. She had memorized trade agreements, territorial disputes, and cultural taboos. She spoke 7 different alien languages and could bow in the proper style for each species. But nothing had prepared her for the feeling of standing here, representing all of humanity, while these ancient beings decided her species' future. Colonel Marcus Webb stood behind her, wearing his dress uniform but keeping his mouth shut. The military man had wanted to speak during the preparation sessions, had arguments about humanity's true capabilities. But Chen had silenced him. This was diplomacy, not warfare. They needed to follow the rules, show respect, prove that humans could be civilized members of galactic society. The Zephyrian Chancellor floated forward on his platform. Chancellor Vextar was old even by alien standards, his blue skin marked with the silver lines that showed his age and wisdom. His species had been members of the Council for over 2,000 years. They were known for their careful thinking and fair judgment. If anyone would give humanity a fair chance, it would be the Zephyrians. Ambassador Chen of the human species, Vextar said, his voice carried by translators to every corner of the hall. We have completed our assessment of your people's request for membership in the Galactic Council. We have studied your technology, your military capabilities, your government systems, and your cultural development. Chen felt her heart beating, faster. 3 years of work came down to this moment. Humanity had worked so hard to get this far. They had shared their art, their music, their literature. They had opened their borders to alien observers. They had answered every question, submitted to every test. Surely that had to count for something. We appreciate the thoroughness of your evaluation, Chen replied, using the formal speech patterns the aliens preferred. Humanity is honored to be considered for membership in this great council. The Chancellor nodded slowly. Behind him, the other council members shifted in their seats. The insectoid hive queen clicked her mandibles together, a sound that usually meant disapproval. The gaseous being known as the whisper made no sound at all, which was somehow worse than clicking. Your species shows promise, Vextar continued. You have curiosity, creativity, and a certain enthusiasm for exploration. However, our assessment reveals significant concerns about your readiness for full membership. Chen's stomach dropped, but she kept her face neutral. She had expected this. Most species took several attempts before gaining full membership. They would probably offer associate status, maybe limited trading rights. It wasn't what they had hoped for, but it was a start. Your technology ranks in the bottom tier of known civilizations, the Chancellor said, reading from a holographic display that appeared before him. Your fastest ships require months to travel distances our vessels cover in days. Your weapons are based on crude chemical explosives and primitive projectiles. Your computers are massive machines that accomplish less than our personal communication devices. Each word hit Chen like a physical blow. She knew humanity's technology wasn't the most advanced, but calling it primitive seemed unfair. Human engineers were clever, finding solutions that worked with the materials and knowledge they had. Your military presents an even greater concern, Vextar continued. Our observers report constant conflicts among your own species. Your soldiers show a disturbing willingness to accept casualties that no civilized being would tolerate. Your tactical thinking appears chaotic and unpredictable. Most troubling, your warriors seem to enjoy combat in a way that suggests psychological instability. Colonel Webb shifted behind her, and Chen could feel his anger even without looking at him. She had warned him this might happen. The Council valued peace and order above all else. Humanity's history of warfare would naturally concern them. Furthermore, the Chancellor went on, your lifespans are remarkably short. Most Council species live for centuries or millennia. You measure your lives in mere decades. This creates a dangerous impulsiveness in your decision-making. You rush toward solutions without considering long-term consequences. The other Council members were nodding now. The crystal-based resonance folk chimed their agreement. The plant-like growers rustled their leaves in what Chen recognized as satisfaction. They had all made up their minds before she even arrived. Finally, your governmental systems are fragmentary and contradictory. You have nearly 200 separate nations, each with different laws, customs, and goals. You cannot speak with one voice or make binding agreements for your entire species. How can we trust treaties with beings who cannot even agree among themselves? Chen wanted to argue. She wanted to explain that diversity was humanity's strength, not its weakness. That multiple perspectives led to better solutions. That competition drove innovation. But she held her tongue. Interrupting the Chancellor would be a grave insult. Based on these factors, Vextar announced, the Galactic Council votes on humanity's status. One by one, the Council members cast their votes. The results appeared as glowing symbols above each delegate's position. Green for full membership, yellow for associate status, red for rejection, blue for protected status. Red, 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 blue, red, blue, blue, red, blue, red, red. Chen watched her dreams die with each glowing symbol. 10 red votes for rejection, 4 blue votes for protected status, no green votes at all, no yellow votes for association. The majority has spoken, Chancellor Vextar declared. Humanity is hereby classified as a protected developing species, under the guidance and supervision of the Galactic Council. All human expansion beyond your home system is suspended pending further development. Council representatives will be assigned to monitor your progress and provide guidance toward eventual civilization. The words hit Chen harder than any physical blow. Protected, developing, supervised. They were treating humanity like children who needed adults to watch over them. We understand this may be disappointing, the Chancellor continued, though his tone suggested he didn't really care about human feelings. However, this status comes with benefits. You will receive limited access to Council medical technology. Your system will be protected from hostile forces. When your species has matured sufficiently, you may reapply for full membership. Chen managed to keep her voice steady. How long before we can reapply? The Chancellor consulted his display again. Typically, developing species require 2 to 3 centuries of guided development before they are ready for reconsideration. 200 years. Longer than any human alive would live to see. Chen felt the weight of failure crushing down on her. Generations of humans would grow up knowing their species wasn't good enough for the galaxy's elite club. As the session began to close, alarms suddenly filled the chamber. Red lights flashed from every surface. The council members looked around in confusion as aides rushed into the hall. A young Zephyrian official ran to the Chancellor's platform, whispering urgently in his ear. Vexitar's blue skin went pale, almost white with shock. Emergency session, he announced, his voice shaking. All delegates remain in the chamber. We have received urgent reports from the Outer Rim territories. Chen looked at Colonel Webb, who had stepped closer to her side. Whatever was happening, it was big enough to interrupt the Council's formal procedures. And something in the way the aliens were looking at each other suggested it wasn't good news. The galaxy was about to change, and humanity's rejected status might suddenly become the least of everyone's problems. The emergency alerts continued blaring as more council aides rushed into the chamber. Ambassador Chen watched the alien delegates transform from bored judges into worried leaders. Whatever news they were receiving, it was serious enough to make beings who had lived for centuries look genuinely afraid. Chancellor Vextar listened to his aide's urgent whispers, his blue face growing paler by the second. Around the chamber, other council members were receiving similar reports from their own staff. The insectoid hive queen's mandibles clicked rapidly in what Chen recognized as extreme agitation. The gaseous wisper's form flickered and swirled, with unusual speed. "Delegates," Vextar announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet chamber. "We have received confirmation of reports from the Kepler Outer Rim. 3 colonial worlds have gone completely silent within the past solar day. All communication has ceased. Emergency beacons have activated and then stopped transmitting." Colonel Webb leaned forward slightly behind Chen. She could feel his military instincts activating, even though they were supposedly here as junior partners in galactic civilization. The Chancellor continued reading from his display. Long-range sensors detect massive energy signatures moving through the affected systems. The signatures match historical records from the archive worlds. He paused as if the words were difficult to speak. "The Devourers have returned." A ripple of shock went through the council chamber. Several delegates began speaking at once in their own languages. Chen had studied galactic history during her preparation, but the Devourers were mentioned only in the oldest texts. They were supposed to be extinct, destroyed thousands of years ago. "For the benefit of our guests," Vextar said, nodding toward Chen, "the Devourers are an ancient machine intelligence that consumed 12 systems before being defeated in the Great War, 3 millennia ago. Their ships harvest all organic and electronic matter from planets, leaving only dead rock behind." The Hive Queen's translator crackled to life. "The archive worlds claimed they were completely destroyed. Every ship, every base, every trace of their existence was eliminated." "Apparently not," replied the crystal-based delegate from the resonance folk, their voice chiming like broken glass. "The question now is how many ships they have and what their current capabilities might be." Chen found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "What's the Council's response protocol for this kind of threat?" Several delegates looked at her with expressions that ranged from surprise to annoyance. She was supposed to be a rejected applicant, not a participant in Council security discussions. Chancellor Vexitar answered anyway, perhaps out of habit. "The Inner Defense Fleet will mobilize immediately. The Hegemarch will take command and deploy standard containment tactics. We will establish a defensive perimeter around the affected systems and prevent the Devourers from advancing into Council core territory." Colonel Webb spoke up for the first time. "What's the size of this Inner Defense Fleet?" "That information is classified," snapped the plant-like delegate from the growers, their leaves rustling with irritation. "Humans do not have clearance for Council military secrets." Chen placed a restraining hand on Webb's arm before he could respond. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the frustration of a military man being dismissed by bureaucrats. Over. The next few hours, the council chamber became a crisis command center. Reports flowed in from across the outer rim. The Devourer fleet was massive, larger than historical records suggested was possible. They were moving faster than expected, consuming not just planets, but entire systems at an unprecedented rate. Tiu, Hegemarch, Supreme Commander of Council Forces, appeared via hologram. He was a proud being from the warrior caste of the Supremacy species, standing over 8 feet tall with 4 arms and natural armor plating. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. "Honored council members," the Hegemarch reported, "the Inner Defense Fleet is deploying according to established protocols. We will engage the Devourers using proven tactics from the historical archives. Our ships are superior to anything they possessed 3,000 years ago. This threat will be contained." Chen watched the military briefing with growing unease. The council's approach seemed overly formal, bound by procedures and historical precedent. Colonel Webb was practically vibrating with the need to speak, but protocol kept him silent. The first battle reports arrived 6 hours later. The Hegemarch's confident voice was replaced by confusion and concern. "The enemy is not responding to our tactical approaches as predicted. Their ships appear to have adapted beyond historical parameters. They are using unpredictable movement patterns and weapon configurations that do not match archived data." Chancellor Vextar leaned forward in his floating seat. "Clarify your status, Hegemarch. What are your current losses?" A pause. We have lost 37 vessels in the initial engagement. The enemy suffered minimal damage. They are not following established combat doctrines. Our predictive algorithms cannot anticipate their next moves. The council chamber fell silent. 37 ships lost in a single battle was more than the council had lost in the past century combined. Chen could see the shock on every alien face. Request permission to withdraw and reassess, the Hegemarch continued, his voice strained. The enemy tactics are completely irrational. They sacrifice their own units without strategic purpose. They attack from impossible angles. They seem to anticipate our responses before we make them. As the reports continued throughout the day, the situation grew worse. The Devourers weren't just winning battles. They were learning from each engagement. Their ships adapted to council weapons and tactics in real time. What should have been a straightforward military operation was turning into a rout. By evening, 3 more worlds had gone silent. The inner defense fleet was in full retreat. The Hegemarch himself had been forced to abandon his command ship when the Devourers targeted it with weapons that shouldn't have existed. Chen sat in her assigned quarters in the council complex, watching news feeds from across the galaxy. Panic was spreading through council space. Some species were already evacuating their frontier colonies. Others were demanding emergency military assistance. The careful order that had maintained galactic peace for millennia was cracking. A soft chime at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Chancellor Vextar standing in the hallway, alone except for a single bodyguard. His formal robes were wrinkled, his blue skin marked with stress patterns she had read about but never seen. "Ambassador Chen," he said quietly. "May I speak with you privately?" Chen stepped aside to let him enter. This was unprecedented. Council, chancellors didn't make private visits to rejected applicants. Something had changed. Vextar moved to the window overlooking the planet's surface. For a long moment he was silent, watching the lights of the alien city below. "Tell me honestly," he finally said. "How would humans respond to the Devourer threat?" Chen was careful with her answer. "I'm not a military expert, Chancellor. That would be Colonel Webb's area. But you know your species. You understand how they think, how they react to existential threats." He turned to face her. "Our approaches are failing. The Devourers seem to counter every strategy we employ. Perhaps we need perspectives that are not bound by our traditions." Chen felt her pulse quicken. Was he actually asking for human help, after spending the day declaring humanity too primitive for council membership? Would the council be willing to accept human military assistance? She asked carefully. Vexitar's stress patterns deepened. Not officially. The council voted today to classify humans as a developing species. But perhaps there could be unofficial consultation, advisory roles, mercenary contracts that wouldn't require formal recognition. Chen thought about Colonel Webb's frustration during the military briefings, his obvious desire to contribute despite being dismissed as primitive. She thought about Earth's military leaders, who had been studying council tactics for years while preparing for this diplomatic mission. "I would need to consult with my government," she said, "and with our military leadership." "Of course." Vextar moved toward the door, then paused. "Ambassador Chen, I want you to know that today's vote was not personal. The Council follows established procedures for evaluating species readiness. But these are unusual times. Perhaps some procedures need to be flexible." After he left, Chen activated her encrypted communication system. It took several minutes to establish a connection with Earth, but eventually President Martinez appeared on her screen, along with General Harrison from the Joint Chiefs. "The situation here has changed dramatically," Chen reported. "The Council is facing an existential threat, and their traditional approaches are failing. They may be willing to accept human military assistance, albeit unofficially." General Harrison leaned forward. "What kind of assistance are we talking about?" "Military advisory roles, mercenary contracts, anything that doesn't require them to officially recognize our capabilities." Chen paused. "Sir, I think this might be the opportunity we've been waiting for. Not to join their club, but to show them what we're really capable of. President Martinez was quiet for a moment. General, what's the status of Operation Trojan Horse? All fleets are positioned and ready, Harrison replied. The call came at dawn. Ambassador Chen was barely awake when her communication system activated, showing Chancellor Vextar's strained face on the emergency channel. Ambassador, we need to speak immediately, he said without preamble. The situation has become critical. Chen dressed quickly and made her way to the council chambers where she found chaos. Emergency meetings were happening in multiple languages simultaneously. Military displays showed the advancing Devourer fleet like a spreading infection across the galactic map. In just 2 days, they had consumed 6 worlds and were moving toward more populated systems. Vextar met her at the chamber entrance, his blue skin now marked with deep stress patterns that indicated exhaustion and fear. 3 more fleets have engaged the Devourers. All 3 were defeated with minimal enemy losses. The Hegemarch believes we have perhaps 72 hours before they reach the industrial centers of the Middle Rim. Colonel Webb joined them, still wearing his dress uniform but looking more alert than he had since arriving. Chen could see the change in his posture. He was no longer playing the role of diplomatic attaché. Something in his bearing suggested he was now operating under different orders. The Council has voted to formally request human military assistance, Vexitar continued. Not as members, you understand, but as contractors, mercenaries. We can offer advanced medical technology, territorial concessions in uninhabited systems, and favorable trade agreements in exchange for whatever ships you can provide. Chen nodded gravely, though she felt a spark of satisfaction. I'll need to contact my government immediately. Of course. Use any facilities you require. Vextar paused, looking almost embarrassed. I should mention that we are not expecting significant military contribution. We understand that human ships are limited in capability, but perhaps your crew's enthusiasm might provide some tactical advantages. Colonel Webb spoke up for the first time. Chancellor, what's your current assessment of Devourer capabilities and weaknesses? Vextar gestured to a holographic display. They appear to have ships ranging from frigate-sized harvesters to massive dreadnoughts. Their technology has advanced beyond historical records. Most concerning, they adapt to our tactics in real time. Every strategy we employ becomes useless after the first engagement. Webb studied the tactical displays with professional interest. What about their command structure? How do they coordinate their fleets? Unknown. They don't appear to use conventional communication methods. Some theorists suggest they operate as a collective intelligence. Chen watched Webb absorb this information, seeing him catalog every detail. She had read his military file. He wasn't just a colonel. He was one of Earth's foremost experts on asymmetric warfare. His doctorate in military history included extensive study of unconventional tactics throughout human civilization. I'll contact Earth immediately, Chen said. Colonel Webb will coordinate with your military staff to understand current deployment needs. Over the next 6 hours, Chen maintained carefully staged communications with Earth. She played her role perfectly, the diplomatic representative requesting limited military support from a species the Council considered primitive. Meanwhile, Webb worked with Council military planners asking detailed questions about fleet positions, enemy movements, and tactical requirements. What the Council didn't know was that human fleets were already moving. Deep in the asteroid belt, between Mars and Jupiter, massive shipyards that the Council observers had dismissed as primitive mining operations were releasing vessels that had been months in preparation. The ships emerging from those facilities bore no resemblance to the crude exploration vessels humanity had shown to galactic observers. Admiral Sarah Kim commanded the operation from the stealth carrier USS Defiance, hidden in Jupiter's radiation shadow. Her fleet represented a new generation of human warfare, ships designed not for exploration or trade, but for fighting enemies with superior technology. Operation Trojan Horse is a go, came the encrypted message from Earth. You have full authorization for tactical engagement. Show them what humans do when we stop playing nice. The human fleet that began jumping toward Council space was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Unlike Council vessels with their elegant, uniform designs, humanity's warships were a chaotic mix of different national and corporate designs. Russian missile frigates bristled with launch tubes. Japanese stealth destroyers used radar-absorbing materials that made them nearly invisible. American carrier groups launched swarms of fighter craft that operated more like guided missiles than traditional spacecraft. Most unusual of all were the converted civilian vessels. Brazilian asteroid miners had been retrofitted with magnetic railguns that could accelerate projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. African space platforms, originally built for launching satellites, now carried weapons that violated every Council treaty on acceptable military technology. The first human ships arrived at the Council's defensive perimeter 18 hours after the formal request for assistance. Council observers watching the approach were initially puzzled by what they saw. "Are those cargo ships?" asked the Resonance Folk delegate, watching the scanner displays. Indeed, many of the human vessels looked like converted merchant craft. They were bulky, asymmetrical, and covered with what appeared to be improvised modifications. Compared to the sleek lines of Council warships, they looked like flying junk heaps. Admiral Kim opened communications with the Council fleet. "This is Admiral Kim of the Human Expeditionary Force. We're here to assist with your devourer problem." "Burrito," Hegemarch himself responded, his four-armed form appearing on Kim's view screen. "Admiral Kim, we appreciate your species' willingness to assist. However, I must warn you that these are not the primitive raiders you humans may be familiar with. The Devourers possess technology that has defeated our most advanced fleets." Kim smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. "Hegemarch, I appreciate the warning, but you might be surprised what humans can do when we're properly motivated." The first engagement came 6 hours later. The Devourers approached, the joint Human Council fleet using their standard tactics, a seemingly chaotic advance that had confounded every previous enemy. Their ships moved in patterns that appeared random but somehow coordinated, making it impossible to predict their next actions. The Council ships responded according to established doctrine. They formed precise battle lines, coordinated their targeting systems, and prepared to engage according to the tactical manuals that had served them for millennia. The human ships did something completely different. Instead of forming lines, they scattered across 3 dimensions like a swarm of angry insects. Instead of coordinating their attacks, each ship seemed to operate independently. Instead of following predictable patterns, they moved in ways that seemed to violate basic military logic. The USS Montana, a converted asteroid mining ship, accelerated directly toward the largest Devourer vessel while spinning end over end. This should have made it impossible to aim weapons or defend against incoming fire. Instead, it launched a spread of nuclear-tipped missiles while using its industrial mining lasers to blind enemy sensors. The Japanese destroyer Yamato simply vanished from sensors entirely, reappearing behind the Devourer formation to launch waves of autonomous hunter-killer drones that attacked like a pack of wolves. The Russian frigate Stalingrad did something that horrified the Council observers. It deliberately rammed a Devourer cruiser at full acceleration, detonating its entire missile payload on impact. The explosion destroyed both ships, but it also disrupted the enemy formation enough for other human vessels to exploit the gap. "What are they doing?" the Hegemarch demanded over the comm system. "Those tactics are completely irrational." Admiral Kim's voice came back calm and controlled. "Hegemarch, meet humanity's greatest military advantage. We're too stupid to know when we're supposed to lose." The battle continued for 3 hours. The Devourers, encountering tactics that made no logical sense, struggled to adapt their responses. Every time their artificial intelligence began to predict human behavior, the humans would do something even more unpredictable. A Brazilian mining platform used its ore processing equipment to literally digest a Devourer ship, breaking it down. At the molecular level, an African launch platform deployed a weapon that was technically classified as industrial equipment, a massive magnetic coil that fired chunks of asteroids at relativistic speeds. Most disturbing to the Council observers, the human crews seemed to enjoy the chaos. They communicated in rapid bursts of slang and profanity, coordinated through methods that appeared to rely more on intuition than formal command structure, and showed a disturbing willingness to take risks that no rational being would accept. When the battle ended, 17 Devourer ships were destroyed or disabled. The human fleet had lost 9 vessels, but their crews showed no signs of mourning. Instead, they immediately began analyzing the wreckage, adapting enemy technology for their own use, and planning the next engagement. The Hegemarch stared at the tactical displays in shock. How did they do that? Those tactics should not have worked against adaptive AI. Colonel Webb, who had been quietly observing from the Council command ship, finally spoke up. The second wave of human reinforcements arrived like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Where the first fleet had been impressive, this new force was overwhelming in its sheer audacity. Thousands of vessels dropped out of hyperspace across multiple systems simultaneously, each one representing a different aspect of human military thinking. Admiral Kim watched the tactical displays from her command center, now relocated to a captured Devourer station that human engineers were rapidly converting to their needs. The speed of the conversion horrified Council observers. Humans seemed willing to use any technology they could understand, regardless of whether it was safe or officially approved. Report from the Kepler front, her communications officer announced. Captain Martinez has successfully deployed the Ghost Fleet protocol. Enemy forces are engaging phantom targets while our real ships hit them from 6 different vectors. The Ghost Fleet was a uniquely human innovation. Using a combination of holograms, signal jammers, and old-fashioned misdirection, human forces could make the enemy think they were fighting a much larger fleet, while the actual ships attacked from completely different positions. It was the kind of strategy that required crews comfortable with deception and improvisation, qualities that Council species found disturbing. Asteroid Belt Squadron reports successful deployment of Operation Mayfly, came another update. Estimated enemy losses, 43 harvester ships. Our losses, acceptable. Operation Mayfly was even more disturbing to Council sensibilities. It involved converting civilian cargo haulers into massive bombs, staffed by volunteer crews who would ram enemy vessels at the critical moment. The volunteers treated these suicide missions as routine assignments, often competing for the honor of taking on the most dangerous targets. Chancellor Vextar arrived at the command center looking exhausted. The past week of human military operations had shattered every assumption the Council held about acceptable warfare. Admiral Kim, we need to discuss your tactical methods. Kim turned from her displays, her expression neutral. What seems to be the problem, Chancellor? Your crews are using weapons that were never intended for military purposes. Your tactics involve deliberate sacrifice of personnel and equipment. Your coordination methods appear to rely on chaos rather than proper command structure. Vextar gestured helplessly. By every standard of civilized warfare, what you're doing should be impossible. And yet it's working, Kim replied calmly. The Devourers have lost nearly 60% of their fleet in the past week. Your forces were losing 60% casualties in single engagements. This was true, and it was what made the situation so difficult for the Council to understand. Human tactics violated every principle of efficient military doctrine, yet they were devastatingly effective against an enemy that had adapted to counter every conventional strategy. The human approach to warfare was fundamentally different from anything the Council had experienced. Where alien forces sought to minimize casualties and preserve valuable equipment, humans seemed to view both personnel and machines as expendable resources in service of the mission objective. Captain Sarah Okafor provided a perfect example of this mindset. The former Lagos police officer had volunteered to command a squadron of converted civilian ships in what everyone knew was a suicide mission. Her target was the primary Devourer command vessel, a massive dreadnought that had destroyed 3 Council fleets. Tiger Squadron, this is Tiger Lid, Okafor broadcast to her volunteers. Remember, we're not trying to survive this one, we're trying to make it count. Every second you keep those monsters focused on you is another second for the real fleet to get into position. Her squadron consisted of 12 converted passenger liners, their cargo bays packed with every explosive the engineers could fit. The ships looked harmless enough that the Devourers initially ignored them, focusing on what appeared to be the primary human battle fleet approaching from another direction. By the time the enemy artificial intelligence realized the true threat, Okafor's ships were already inside the Devourer defensive perimeter. They scattered in all directions, each one drawing fire from multiple enemy vessels while transmitting false sensor readings to confuse targeting systems. "This is it, people," Okafor announced as her ship took direct hits from 3 different Devourer cruisers. "It's been an honor flying with you. See you all in hell." The explosion when Tiger Squadron detonated simultaneously was visible from orbit. It destroyed the Devourer command ship and 7 escort vessels, completely disrupting the enemy fleet coordination. The cost was 12 human ships and over 3,000 volunteer crew members. What shocked the Council observers was the human reaction to this sacrifice. Instead of mourning or trauma counseling, the surviving human forces immediately began analyzing the tactical data from the mission, looking for ways to make the next suicide attack even more effective. How can they be so casual about the death of their own people? The Hive Queen asked during an emergency council session. Those crew members volunteered to die. Their families will never see them again. Yet the humans speak of them like they were ammunition expended in battle. Colonel Webb, now serving as official human military liaison, provided the answer that disturbed everyone present. "Your Highness, those crew members died doing exactly what they chose to do. In human culture, there's no greater honor than giving your life to protect others. We don't mourn warriors who die in victory. We celebrate them." This was the fundamental difference that the Council struggled to understand. Where alien cultures valued the preservation of life above all else, humans seemed to value the purpose for which life was spent. They would sacrifice everything for a cause they believed in, and they would do it with enthusiasm. The strategic implications were staggering. The Devourer's artificial intelligence was designed to counter rational opponents who sought to minimize losses while maximizing gains. It couldn't adapt to opponents who deliberately maximized losses in order to achieve objectives that made no logical sense. Human forces began deploying increasingly unconventional tactics. They used biological warfare, not against the Devourers directly, but to create environmental hazards that forced the enemy into disadvantageous positions. They employed psychological warfare against machines, broadcasting signals designed to overload artificial intelligence processing systems. Most disturbing of all, they began recruiting allies from species the Council had written off as terrorist organizations or criminal cartels. Pirates, rebels, and outcasts who had been fighting losing battles against Council authority for generations suddenly found themselves equipped with human weapons and integrated into human tactical doctrine. The Battle of Kepler Station demonstrated the full horror of human military philosophy. The Devourers had surrounded the massive orbital facility, preparing to harvest its resources and population of 12 million beings from 17 different species. The human response involved every principle the Council considered abhorrent. Admiral Kim deployed her forces in a pattern that guaranteed massive casualties, used weapons that violated multiple interstellar treaties, and coordinated with local resistance groups that the Council classified as terrorists. The battle lasted 18 hours and involved tactics that military historians would debate for centuries. Human forces attacked from positions that should have been impossible to reach, using weapons that should have been impossible to deploy. They fought with a combination of careful planning and apparent recklessness that confounded both allies and enemies. When the smoke cleared, the Devourer fleet was in retreat for the first time in recorded history. Kepler Station was saved, though. The human methods of saving it had involved turning 3 levels of the station into impromptu weapons factories and training facilities for civilian resistance fighters. "The humans have fundamentally changed the nature of this conflict," reported the Hegemarch during his debrief to the Council. "The Devourers were designed to counter conventional military thinking. They cannot adapt to opponents who deliberately choose irrational strategies." Chancellor Vextar studied the tactical reports with growing unease. "Hegemarch, what are the long-term implications of human involvement in this conflict?" "Sir, if current trends continue, we will defeat the Devourers within the next 2 months. However, the galaxy will emerge from this conflict with a completely different understanding of military capability. Human tactical doctrine is already being adopted by allied species. Military academies are requesting human instructors. Some of our member species are asking to purchase human weapon systems. The Chancellor realized what this meant. The careful balance of power that had maintained galactic peace for millennia was collapsing. Species that had been content to follow Council leadership were now looking to humanity for military guidance. The supposed primitive beings had become the galaxy's most effective warriors. Ambassador Chen watched the Council emergency sessions from the observation gallery, noting how the dynamics had changed. Where once the alien delegates had spoken, with authority about galactic affairs, now they asked questions about human capabilities and intentions. Where once they had dismissed her as a representative of an inferior species, now they sought her opinions on military strategy and diplomatic solutions. 6 months after the Galactic Council had declared humanity too primitive for membership, Ambassador Sarah Chen walked into the rebuilt council chambers as the representative of the galaxy's newest superpower. The hall looked different now. Human engineering teams had reinforced it after Devourer attacks, and the repairs showed a distinctly practical aesthetic that clashed with the original elegant design. The seating arrangement had changed as well. Where once 12 ancient species had looked down upon petitioners from floating platforms, now the chamber was arranged in concentric circles. Humanity sat in the inner circle alongside the original council species, but their position was no longer that of applicants seeking approval. Chancellor Vextar looked older than his centuries would normally show. The stress patterns on his blue skin had become permanent marks of the crisis that had transformed galactic civilization. Around him, the other original council members showed similar signs of a fundamental shift in their understanding of the universe. "This emergency session is called to order," Vextar announced, though his voice lacked the authority it once carried. "We are gathered to formalize the new agreements that have emerged from the Devourer conflict." The Devourer threat was over. The last of their ships had been destroyed 3 weeks ago in a final battle that showcased everything terrifying about human military philosophy. Human forces had turned an entire moon into a weapon. Using gravity manipulation technology they had reverse-engineered from captured Devourer equipment in less than a month. But the galaxy that emerged from the conflict was fundamentally different from the one that had entered it. The careful hierarchy that had maintained peace for millennia was gone, replaced by something that resembled human international politics more than traditional council governance. Admiral Kim, now holding the newly created position of Galactic Defense Coordinator, stood to address the assembly. The title was a compromise. The council couldn't bring themselves to call her Supreme Military Commander, but everyone understood that's what her role actually was. "Honorable delegates," Kim began, using the formal language that diplomats preferred, while wearing a uniform that showed she was anything but a traditional diplomat. "Our joint forces have successfully eliminated the Devourer threat. However, our analysis suggests this conflict was merely the first of several challenges facing our expanded galactic community." She activated a holographic display showing our galaxy's current military situation. Human bases now existed throughout Council space, originally established as forward operating bases during the war, but now permanent installations. Human patrol fleets maintained security in systems that had never needed military protection before the Devourer invasion. Intelligence reports indicate at least 3 other existential threats operating in nearby galaxy clusters, Kim continued. "The Devourer invasion may have been a probe, testing our defenses before larger conflicts. Additionally, the power vacuum created by the destruction of Devourer-controlled systems has attracted the attention of several hostile entities previously contained by their presence." The Hive Queen clicked her mandibles in what Chen now recognized as resigned acceptance rather than disapproval. "Admiral Kim, what are your recommendations for addressing these potential threats?" "Expanded joint defense agreements, integrated command structures, and accelerated technology sharing programs," Kim replied without hesitation. "In practical terms, this means human military advisors stationed with all member fleets, standardized training programs based on human tactical doctrine, and the establishment of rapid response forces capable of dealing with unconventional threats." What she was describing amounted to human military control over the galaxy, though she was polite enough not to say so directly. The council members understood this perfectly, just as they understood they had no realistic alternative to accepting if the transformation hadn't been imposed by force. It had emerged naturally from the practical realities of the Devourer conflict. Human tactics had proven superior, human weapons had been more effective, and human strategic thinking had been more adaptable than anything the Council possessed. When the war ended, species throughout the galaxy found themselves dependent on human protection. Ambassador Chen stood to address the Council, noting how different this felt from her last appearance in this chamber. The human government has prepared a comprehensive proposal for our new relationship with the Galactic Council, she announced. The proposal was remarkable for what it didn't demand. Humans weren't asking for control over existing Council territories or demanding tribute from member species. Instead, they were offering something far more valuable: protection and partnership in exchange for equal participation in galactic governance. Earth proposes a restructured council with shared leadership responsibilities, Chen explained. Human representatives would participate equally in all decisions affecting galactic security, while council species would maintain authority over internal affairs and cultural matters. Chancellor Vexistar studied the formal documents that appeared on his display. These terms are quite generous, considering your species' current military advantages. Chen smiled, and there was something both friendly and dangerous in the expression. Chancellor, humanity learned long ago that ruling through fear creates more problems than it solves. We prefer partnerships based on mutual benefit. This was true, but it was also irrelevant to the current situation. Whether humans preferred partnerships or not, they now possessed the ability to impose their will on the entire galaxy if they chose to do so. The fact that they were offering cooperation instead of demanding submission was a political calculation, not a sign of weakness. The vote on the new agreements was unanimous. It had to be. The alternative was a galaxy where humanity made unilateral decisions about galactic security, while the Council species hoped their interests would be considered. As the formal ceremony concluded, Chen found herself in the position she had dreamed of 6 months earlier. Humanity was finally a member of galactic civilization. But the circumstances were nothing like what she had imagined during those early diplomatic preparations. Colonel Webb, now General Webb and Earth's representative to the newly created Joint Military Command, joined her as the delegates began filing out of the chamber. "Did you ever imagine it would happen this way?" he asked quietly. Chen watched Chancellor Vextar speaking with his aides, noting how the proud leader now looked to human advisors for guidance on military matters. "Honestly, no. I thought we'd spend decades proving ourselves worthy of their respect. Instead, we proved they needed our protection, which turns out to be the same thing, politically speaking. The transformation extended far beyond military matters. Human universities were establishing exchange programs with alien institutions. Human corporations were entering into joint ventures with council businesses. Human cultural exports were becoming popular throughout the galaxy. Apparently, other species found human entertainment remarkably compelling, especially the parts that council censors had tried to restrict. Most significantly, human approaches to problem-solving were spreading throughout galactic civilization. The careful consensus-based decision-making that had characterized council governance was being supplemented by human-style rapid response protocols. Species that had spent centuries debating issues were learning to make quick decisions based on incomplete information. The changes weren't universally welcomed. Some council species viewed the new order as a form of benevolent occupation, with humans playing the role of protective but controlling guardians. Others worried that human influence would undermine the philosophical and cultural achievements that had made galactic civilization possible. But these concerns were largely academic. The Devourer conflict had demonstrated that the galaxy's greatest threat wasn't cultural contamination or political disruption, it was extinction. When faced with that reality, most species found human dominance preferable to human absence. 6 months later, as Chen prepared to return to Earth for the first time since the crisis began, she reflected on how completely the situation had reversed itself. Humanity had come to the Council seeking membership in their civilization. Instead, they had transformed galactic civilization into something that resembled human international politics. The species that had declared humans too primitive for membership now looked to human leaders for guidance on everything from military strategy to crisis management. The supposedly inferior beings had become the foundation upon which galactic civilization now rested. Standing in her quarters overlooking the Council complex, Chen watched human and alien personnel working together on reconstruction projects. The sight would have been unimaginable during her first visit to this world. Now it was routine. Her communication system chimed with an encrypted message from Earth. President Martinez appeared on the screen, looking pleased but tired. "Ambassador, how are our former judges adapting to the new reality?" Chen considered the question carefully. "Better than expected, actually. They're proud species, but they're not stupid. They understand that cooperation with humanity is their best option for long-term survival. And our military commitments? Extensive but manageable.